Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I'm Juliet, and I'm excited to have you all again here. I know, and I keep saying every single week that it was just a 6 week program, but I just keep finding amazing people. So it's like I need to bring them in for them to share their knowledge. And I feel like this topic is really important for everybody that is looking for a job because it's one of the most ask questions in any interview process from the beginning when you're doing a phone with the recruiter at the end, in the middle, at any point. Even when you are just simply networking, like answering behavioralist interviews is going to be so powerful. Make sure if you are joining us from 80 Plus, YouTube, or LinkedIn that you are typing your questions on the comments. And our guest speaker is going to be reminding us of this about your questions the whole time. So make sure that you type your questions as we go. So, again, welcome everybody. Hello, hello. How are you?
Hi,
Nice to
I'm
have you
good.
here. Yeah.
Thanks. How are you doing?
Thank you. Good. I'm excited. Right now I'm in Mexico and I'm going to be in Mexico for another 3 weeks. So I'm super
Wow,
pumped that I
awesome.
get to do this. Yeah, that I get to do this from Mexico. And I'm excited to have you here. And today I was talking with some of the Cherry on Tech participants, and we are talking how amazing all the guest speakers have been. I've been learning so much. I'm having like live sessions with all my questions all the time. So I love it. Um, okay,
Sounds
I'm
great.
going to leave you and let me just share your screen. And yeah, the
Okay,
floor is yours.
awesome. Thanks, Juliet. Hi, everybody. As part of the Cherry on Tech Job Readiness Support Program, I'll be talking about behavioral interviews, why they're important, what kinds of questions are covered in these interviews, and how to prepare for answering behavioral questions. I'll also cover some more general interviewing tips. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Cheryl Lindo Jones. My pronouns are she and her. I've had a career in tech for more than 20 years, starting as an embedded software engineer after graduating college, working at Motorola Solutions Intel Labs, companies that specialize in networking infrastructure. I learned that that kind of work just wasn't for me. I wanted to work on products that were more consumer facing. So in 2010, my husband and I and our two orange tabbies that you see on this slide here moved from the Chicago suburbs to the San Francisco Bay Area where I live now. I had a brief stint as a mobile tech blogger for a site called Netbook News, which focused on ultra portable laptops and other mobile devices. I got to cover CES as part of that gig, which was very cool, but also very overwhelming and tiring at the same time. Not long after that, I started contracting as a mobile app reviewer for Google Play, although at that time it was still known as Android Market. After a year, I was converted to a full-time employee and I worked my way up to a senior UX solutions consultant, collaborating with many different app developers managed by the Google Play business development team. Today, I'm going to be talking about my experience with behavioral interviews, both as an interviewee and an interviewer. One of my responsibilities as a leader on the partnerships team was to help hire new reviewers as we expanded globally. So while it was important to evaluate a candidate's skills and experience in mobile app UX, I also leaned a lot on behavioral interview questions to understand how a candidate would handle certain situations that we commonly came across in our line of work. Okay, so before we go any further, maybe people could comment in the chat and let me know your familiarity with tech interviews, behavioral questions, and those types of topics because it'll help me understand what areas I should focus on. Also, please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. I'll pause for questions periodically, but go ahead and ask them at any time. I'll do my best to answer them.
I don't see any questions coming up, but I feel like for me, I love the topic, like what you mentioned about how you were using behavioral interviews while you're doing the job and see how they will react while doing it. I think like that is such an amazing way of like how I can I demonstrate my skills on an
Right.
interview because I'm going to be doing this in the future. So I love that. Um,
Awesome.
yes. Okay. I don't see anything. No.
Okay, sounds good. As I alluded to before, I leaned on behavioral questions at least as often and sometimes maybe a little bit more than I ask questions about technical skills. Why? It's because technical skills and processes can be taught, but interpersonal skills are a little bit harder to mold if a candidate has a set way of approaching situations. So, interviewers ask behavioral or situational questions because they're trying to envision what kind of team member you are in the short time that they have speaking with you. That wouldn't be covered if they just asked about your technical skills. They want to know how you'll work with your team and cross functional groups. How would you communicate with your manager or the other stakeholders on your projects? How would you approach solving problems and developing solutions? Would you ask the right questions to fully understand the situation before devising a solution? And when you have that solution, how do you socialize it among your team and get buy in? The interviewer will ask you various situational questions to try and understand your way of working. So it's your job to tell stories that clearly and concisely demonstrate how you will shine as a member of their team. To prepare for a behavioral interview, you'll want to research what sorts of questions are asked and build up your own repository of stories. Think about what the interviewer wants to learn from asking a certain question. For example, there's a question on this slide that says, describe a time when you have identified a problem before it became serious. And that's basically risk management. Your answer should emphasize your attention to detail and the critical thinking that led you to noticing the problem and being proactive in bringing the problem to your manager's attention. Even if you didn't prepare for a certain question, pause, think about what the interviewer wants to learn about you, ask for clarification if needed, and construct your answer. When you're building your knowledge base, it would be helpful to have multiple stories for each kind of question. If it happens to be that more than one interviewer asks you a similar behavioral question, then you won't have to give repeat answers. Interviewers do talk with each other and share notes afterwards. Besides, having a variety of scenarios to choose from will help you tailor your responses to your audience better. So on this slide is a handful of common questions that you might be asked and the categories that they fall under. As you can see, they run the gamut from operational questions around how you might handle project management to more interpersonal skills like effective communication, your style of leadership, how you respond to tough situations, etc. Figure out the core competencies valued for the role that you're going for and focus on the stories that align with those competencies. Depending on the role, you might not have to focus so much on stakeholder management, for example, if you're going for a more junior engineer or designer role. Whereas for senior roles, the interview will likely focus on questions about leadership, communication, stakeholder management, and maybe people management. There are tons of lists out there of common questions, and of course, you can always ask the AI tools of your choice. So do your research and build your knowledge base. This research, besides helping you prepare for interviews, will help you reflect on the work that you've done and the things that you've accomplished. Having these achievements at the ready will help you build a strong case during your interview. Cool. So if anyone has any questions, pop in, but otherwise I'll keep going.
No, we don't have anything yet.
Okay.
Yes, I think. Oh, I love the star method though.
Yeah, it's a great one. Once you've selected on a group of behavioral questions to focus on, you'll want to answer them effectively. So how can you do this? You may have heard of this STAR method. STAR is an easy to remember structure for stories. Describe the situation, explain the tasks that you were given and the role that you played, describe the actions that you took, and highlight the results that you achieved. Using this structure helps the interviewers follow your train of thought and extract the information they need to build the case to hire you. If you keep to the STAR structure, it'll showcase your logic and ability to clearly communicate. It's important to be concise when you answer these questions. Rambling is not going to help you or the interviewer. If at all possible, keep your explanations for the situation and task short, maybe one line each, and spend most of your time on describing the actions that you took and the results that you got. Talk about a complex situation and how you broke it down and made it more manageable. Try not to tell stories about straightforward situations because it won't highlight your critical thinking and problem-solving skills that well. Also, we know that people generally work on teams and collaborate together to achieve goals, but be specific about what you did, since the interviewer will be most interested in the value that you brought to the situation. Sometimes it's hard to say, I did this or I did that when you are part of a great team, but you have to make it clear to the interviewer that you achieved what you achieved. Using we or our team or a lot of terms like that multiple times can create doubt in the interviewer's mind whether you did the work or are describing work that maybe someone else might have done. I know that it's a virtue to be humble, but during an interview, you should advocate for yourself and your work confidently and specifically. Finally, do your best to keep answers 2 to 3 minutes long. The interviewer probably has several questions that they'd like to cover in the session, so manage your time so that they can get through all of the questions that they planned, but be flexible enough to elaborate in follow-up questions. Okay, now I'll go through an example of how to answer a question using the STAR method. As you're listening, try to pick out the situation, task, actions, and results. Describe a project or initiative where you took the lead. From time to time, the Android team needed support for hardware launches at Google I/O by securing a group of mobile apps that were well optimized for the hardware being launched. I led these projects to evaluate the app candidates due to my well-known experience and enthusiasm for new and emerging tech. I consulted with the hardware teams to determine the product features that they wanted to highlight and learned what requirements they presented to developers. I also evaluated a few key apps myself to understand what the canonical good user experience would be so that I could build and document the review process, then train the team on it. This review process involved the team sending evaluations feedback to developers so they could fix any issues our team found and iterate on those apps until they were ready for featuring at I/O. I led the review efforts, monitored progress, handled escalations, and communicated status to key stakeholders. The projects I led consistently resulted in a list of several apps being highlighted at I/O, showing excellent apps that provided great user experience for customers and served as an inspiration for other developers. And scene. It's important not to get too bogged down in the details because they likely won't mean anything to the interviewer unless you happen to know that they have specific experience in that domain and would be impressed by your in-depth knowledge. It's more likely that a high-level overview of the scenario will be sufficient, but be ready for follow-up questions in case they do want to dig into details. Okay, I have a second example, but let me know if you have any questions.
I do have a question myself.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sure.
Yes. No. Yeah, I was going to ask you about when you think about preparing this, like in this case, do you write down the answers and you break down the everything like this, and then you go and fill it up? Like, how do you prepare for this?
Yeah, I mean, I would do it like that. I basically would try to think, well, at first I would think of like, what stories do I want to tell? And really gather up all the details about what happened, what did I do, what were the results. And then once I got all of those stories together in like a list or whatever, then I would think about like I would essentially script it so that it makes it easier for me to kind of think of like, how do I answer this question? And maybe some people don't want to script things. Maybe they want to like answer more off the cuff, but really, as long as you think about structuring it in the STAR method, where you talk about the situation overview first, you do the tasks in your role, and then you do the actions and the results, any way that you approach it would be fine. But for me personally, I basically would do it like this, where I write out, the situation, task, action, and result, and then kind of script it for myself, and then practice that script. Because then once I have that story in my head, it's easier for me to like tell it and maybe riff on, what the interviewer is asking about, and adjust it to my audience.
Definitely. And I feel like um, this is something that, because I've been talking with so many people in the last 6 weeks, is something that every single person keep mentioning, that is just practice. Like,
Yeah,
you don't get good. I mean, there is some people that they can just answer on any question without any practicing. I'm not one of those. So I feel
yeah,
like having those all these examples, writing them down and having a structure is not that you need to memorize it. I feel like those are two different things. It's more
right.
about that you have the structure, and you have something to follow because you have done it in the past. Do you do any reference now? Let's say that I'm applying for X job, and I know that in the description they need A, B, and C, and there are some values that they highlight on the description. Do
Hmm.
you include some of these ones during this part, or do you put it somewhere else?
Yeah, totally. I would. Well, I think the main benefit of having all your stories in a repository is that as you're looking at job listings and seeing what the company is looking for, like the keywords and the key attributes that they list in the listing, you can just pick and choose from your repository and tell the stories that most align with those attributes that they're looking for. Um, and that's why it's great to have like a large repository to pull from, because then you're prepared for whatever the roles might be asking for.
This is maybe like a different question, and this is something maybe outside of what we're talking right now. But what happened in many cases is like, oh my goodness, I'm working in this project right now and I know everything. Yeah, so I did this, I did that, I create this. Anyway, I remember every single thing today. What about in 3 months, in 6 months? Yes, like, what do I do with something that happened in the past? How do I
Yeah.
bring this story to the present? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been kind of a challenge for me, like when you're working in a tech corporate job, they have those quarterly or like half yearly evaluations. So you kind of have to go through this process where it's like, what did I do in the last 6 months? What were the projects that I worked on? What specific actions did I take, and what did that result in? Like, you really have to talk about that. So, the ideal situation would be, as you're working, you make a note of this stuff. I never did that because, you're so busy doing the work that it's, documenting the work kind of like goes by the wayside. But to make it easier on yourself, if you can remember to do that, that would be great. But I think it's also helpful if maybe you can like go into a brainstorming session with like one of your coworkers or people who worked with you on those projects and kind of say like, I remember these details. Do you remember anything that maybe I'm forgetting here? And kind of build up your stories that way.
And with this example that you're giving, I feel like some many times the other person will remember better what you did. It's like, oh, remember you this thing and the
Totally.
other, and it's like, okay, I love that. And I feel like for me, every time I will do like a more serious feedback session with my manager, and we will sit down and I usually let them do all the work for me because they have seen me from outside and they have like a different perspective of how was my work. So
Right.
I ask them to write the good stuff that I did. That sometimes it slipped through my fingers. Yeah, it's like, oh yes, I did that. Or again, we're just talking about something different right now, but what happens sometimes in many cases is that something that you do maybe frequently and it's something that you're really good at it, like I don't know, maybe facilitating a meeting, putting together a slide deck, or presenting,
Yeah.
maybe because it's something that you do all the time that you keep forgetting that you did it.
Yeah.
And that's when your managers or your coworkers come into place. It's like, you just presented 7 times in the last 3 months or whatever. So I feel like people always around you will remember those details for
Yeah,
sure.
that's a really good point. I mean, yes, for me, I do feel that oftentimes I forget certain things that I do, or it just doesn't occur to me to mention it because it feels like something mundane that I just do, but it happens to be really helpful for somebody else. So, at my previous job, I peer feedback and like peer not bonuses, but like peer awards, like peer recognitions kind of play into that, where, sometimes people will give unsolicited recognition for stuff that you do. And of course, depending on your situation, you might not have that, but any way that you can talk to coworkers or people who worked on projects with you, it's great to kind of revisit what you did and kind of see it from someone else's point of view so that you can incorporate that information into your own stories. Because, yeah, totally for me, I forget about that stuff all the time. I'll forget that I did a certain project because, some other projects were really a high
Mhm.
priority and I was always focusing on those. But then there's this other side project that was really important to somebody and they appreciated it. So it's always
Yeah.
good to get outside feedback.
And to going back into our behavioral questions, I feel like these spaces are great for anyone to practice the behavioral interviews.
Yeah.
And if you practice from a project that just happened with the people that you work with, they're going to give you amazing feedback into the things that happen and their results. So practice, practice, practice. Okay, I'll let you continue with the next example. If I
Sure.
see any questions, I will just bring them up.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so for this example, I want to focus on a challenging example. So don't be afraid to talk about challenges that you faced, whether it was a project that didn't run smoothly or a situation where you had to deal with a difficult team interaction. These are chances for the interviewer to understand how you deal with setbacks and learn from them. Inevitably, you'll run into challenging scenarios in your career, and so it's important to show that you can deal with them with grace and professionalism. So, tell me about a project that didn't go as planned. One way to respond to this is thank you. That's an important, especially if you want to think about it more before you answer. You can say something like, thank you. That's an important question. Let me think about it and actually pause, think about how you want to bring this up. Okay. Google Play's developer marketing team hosted several developer events to engage with the community throughout the year. They requested our UX consulting team to evaluate attendees' apps and provide feedback. I was eager to attend and support these events because they were often geared towards smaller developers, though larger dev shops would also attend, and I enjoyed helping indie devs. I worked with the dev marketing team on several of these events, building a small consultant team to work on the custom evaluations, and I often did evaluations on my own to prepare for the event. I made final adjustments on the reports for my team, and I delivered the feedback at the event. Now, while the developers were very happy to get attention from our team and receive free consultations, this didn't always result in any meaningful updates made to the apps or the games that we evaluated. So at performance evaluation time, what we were talking about with Juliet previously, I didn't have much to show for my efforts besides reporting how many consultations were delivered for which developers. It essentially helped maintain good vibes with developers and not much more. The ad hoc processes I built for each event were additionally not scalable since they were always customized for each event. So I learned that while I was helping maintain good relationships with our partners, this was good for the dev marketing team and the BD management team for their success metrics, but it didn't result in any broad measurable impact aligned with my team's goals. So I subsequently pivoted into a more strategic UX consulting program, working with developers who had just launched new games and were prioritizing addressing business and UX feedback from the partnerships team so that we could track tangible revenue impacts from our consultations. The pilot growth consulting program resulted in multi-million-dollar uplift in performance for several of the partners that we consulted with. So in this answer, I covered the situation, how it played out in a way that didn't end up being a good return on my investment of time and effort. And I described how I reacted and pivoted to a program that had better outcomes. I didn't go into unnecessary details to try to blame the poor situation on someone else or be defensive about the earlier actions that I took. I objectively described what happened, what I learned, and how I implemented those learnings. Try to do this as you work on your own stories of overcoming challenging situations. Okay, so next I will go.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask you because I feel like this is
Sure.
like a scary question because I feel like sometimes you don't want to look bad. Yes, it's like, oh, I'm perfect. I don't do mistakes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we know all of us, like any kind of job or any situation in life, like something is going to be wrong. So I don't know if you have an example of like a situation when these questions didn't go well and the person didn't answer in the good way or the right way for them to highlight their learnings. I feel like that's the most important, but I feel like you gave us a little bit of like cues when you were mentioning what to do or not.
Yeah, I think the tendency, I think, when people start talking about, the challenging situations or their failures is that they get defensive and they want to prove to the person who they're talking to that, it wasn't really my fault. There were all these circumstances that happened around me that didn't allow me to do what I wanted to do or to, reach the goals that I wanted to reach. And I think that's not a great way of handling it because it shows to the interviewer you don't take responsibility and accountability for what happened. You might become like someone who's hard to collaborate with because if things don't go your way, you might, based on the way that you gave your answer, people might think that immediately you're going to be defensive and you're going to blame other people rather than learning from the mistake and implementing those learnings. So I think for me, when I deal with these challenging situations, it's like I try to be as objective as possible. I want to describe the situation objectively. I want to, if you're telling the truth about what happened, people can't say anything. It's what happened. But if you start coloring it with personal information of like, oh, this person didn't help me when I asked them for help or whatever, then it becomes a situation of like, they said, I said, and it just makes it difficult for everyone. So I think really when you think about these situations, it's very tough to not take these things personally. But when you recount it to somebody else, take all of the personal out of it. Like, really think about what happened, recount that, think about what you learned and what you did to change. And even if it's a situation where it didn't turn out well for you and you weren't able to turn it around, um, talk about the learnings afterwards anyway. Like, you could say, this situation never resolved itself, but thinking back on it, this is what I probably should have done, or these are things that I would do in the future.
Definitely. And again, I feel like I love that part that you're saying is you're just not answering the questions to see what you did in the past, but this is something that it could happen in the future. Yeah. So you
Mhm.
are, that's what the behavioral questions about is like how you're going to react, how you are going to learn from this experience and how you can show us that right now. So it's not just about answering the question, but it's like how you will be behaving or acting in the future. So I feel like that's why this question is all about. And I love that part. It's like sometimes stuff happening and never gets resolved, but it's like, what would you do better? What would you
Yeah.
change? What do you learn? And how are you using those learnings for the future? So I feel like that's really powerful at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's really
Okay,
hard to think about these situations. I mean,
definitely.
even when I was thinking about an example to use in this presentation, I was like, oh, I don't like that situation. It didn't turn out that great. I don't want to talk about it. But yeah, like, I think one of the things that we did or we tried to do on my previous job was to normalize failure. Like, be okay with failing. Talk about the failures. There was even someone who's trying to make it kind of like a brown bag presentation, like regularly, where people talked about things that happened that didn't go well. This is what we learned. This is what we should do in the future, blah, blah, blah. And I think it would be great if we could do that. We could normalize having failures, but learning from them and not being penalized. I mean, assuming that you did all you could, you did the best that you can, and you weren't being, super combative or whatever in the situation. Like, failures happen, and we just have to deal with them. And we shouldn't feel bad about talking about them because that's how you learn.
Another question is I feel like a lot of people that come into Cherry on Tech is they don't have like hands-on experience on tech.
Right.
So when we go, how do we go about for these kind of questions? Like what kind of examples will be useful to bring up?
I think I talk about something similar later, like in the next section of like if you don't have a situation, like if you can't talk about a certain situation because you haven't experienced it, um, you can kind of talk about something as similar as you can to the situation, or talk about it in a hypothetical situation, like based on how the circumstances that you've described, how I approach working, how I approach problem solving and things like that, this is how I would react. Because essentially they ask these questions to understand how you would react in a non-ideal situation. So as long as you can figure out a way to tell them that in a way that's like understandable and believable, then I think that's the best way you can go. And besides, like, if you don't have experience, you might be going for a junior role anyway, so they'll probably understand that you don't have like this particular work experience yet. So yeah, I think
I
just
love
trying to
that.
handle it on the fly is like probably the
Yes.
best way to do it. That's how I do it.
Well, I will let you keep going and I will have more questions. Don't worry.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so for these additional interviewing tips, I broke them into 4 areas: practice, presence, inquire, and refine. So practice makes Practice. Practice makes perfect for a reason. Doing mock interviews helps you get into the right mind space to answer questions, and your interviewers can provide immediate feedback on your performance. Repeating your stories can help you get more comfortable with the wording, the cadence, and your inflection even to help emphasize certain points. You can also time your answers to make sure that they come in around 2 to 3 minutes each. I actually saw a post on LinkedIn just yesterday about an AI interviewing tool that Google launched where you can choose 5 questions to be asked for a certain domain like UX, data analysis, or cybersecurity, for example, and you answer verbally like you would in a regular interview. And the tool will analyze your responses and provide feedback on areas that you might want to improve. I don't have any experience with this tool since I just saw it yesterday, but it's one of the many options that you have for practicing interviewing. However you decide to practice, the repetition is key. Okay, presence. So this is a pretty big topic. It's an important topic. So I go over a lot here. So bear with me. Having a confident, calm presence during an interview is easier said than done. I know that. But so much can be going through your mind, so it can be challenging. But do your best to quiet the anxiety and try to approach it, talking to the interviewer as if you're chatting with a friend. Obviously, you don't want to be too informal, but know that most interviewers want you to be comfortable during the session. The interview training that I went through at Google emphasized this to try and put interviewees at ease and provide them with a good experience during the interview. The interviewer's job is to gather specific information about candidates to help the hiring team decide. So this job gets tougher if the candidate isn't at ease. Now, I can't guarantee that every interviewer is going to make you comfortable. Some interviewers might want to see how you react when you're in a stressful situation, which personally I don't think is the right way to go and not really conducive to finding good candidates, but that's my opinion. Regardless, you can only control your attitude and your temperament in an interview, so let's focus on that. Practicing interviews will help. So during the interview, try to talk at a reasonable pace. It's easy to get amped up and rush through answers, but slowing your pace down can help you stay calm, and it allows the interviewer to understand your answers better. If you need time to recall an appropriate answer, don't hesitate to pause and think about it. Interviewers are used to this, and they may even be impressed that you have the presence of mind to think before you're speaking. On a related note, make sure that you're giving the right information by asking clarifying questions if needed. Sometimes interviewers intentionally leave out key information when describing a scenario for you to comment on to test whether or not you'll ask questions before answering. If you prefer to make certain assumptions, tell the interviewer that as you're answering so they know where you're coming from. You could say something like, "I'm assuming XYZ, is that correct?" It's really tough to backtrack when answering a question because you made an initial assumption that maybe doesn't align with what the interviewer intended, so clarify first. If you don't have direct experience with the situation that the interviewer is talking about, tell them that, but talk about a similar situation so that it shows you understand what they're asking and are flexible enough to pivot instead of getting stuck. And if you don't have a similar situation ready to talk about, answer hypothetically based on your problem-solving approach. That's what we were talking about earlier. It's important to talk the interviewer through your thought process. So you could say, "I haven't had to deal with that situation before, but given XYZ circumstances, I would do this, this, and this." If you're truly not familiar with the situation or the technology that the interviewer is asking about, don't be afraid to ask them to elaborate and maybe talk about how and when the situation comes up at the company, or talk about how they use the technology in question so that you have more context to work with. Again, talk through your thought processes as you answer. Frame your answers positively. Focus on the learnings that you had and your achievements in spite of the adverse situation, rather than focusing on the negative aspects of the scenario or complaining or blaming other people involved. Be objective in describing the challenges or the negative interactions and emphasize how you got past them. Additionally, try not to be self deprecating in your answers. That may be your gut reaction, which I know it is for me. It's very hard for me not to kind of downplay things, but um, this person who you're talking to probably doesn't know you well enough to understand that you're downplaying your achievements, and that could negatively affect their impressions of you. Stay confident in how you portray your actions and results. Later on, maybe once you've got the job, perhaps you can start to joke around that way. But even then, I'd recommend not doing it too much, as it can impact how others perceive you and your work, either consciously or subconsciously. So finally, if you're telling a story where questions might naturally come up about what you've done, what you could have done differently, go ahead and talk about those learnings without needing to be prompted. It's a good way to show that you're proactive, you're growth minded, and you're always open to learning and improving. Inquire. So this is important. Interviews are a two-way interaction. Make sure to leave time to ask the interviewer questions about how they like to work, what the team dynamics are, and how they measure and reward success. Think about an environment where you would do your best work and figure out if the company can give you that. I know this is a challenging job market, so you might not be in a position where you can be choosy. But as much as possible, you deserve to have a fulfilling job where you can thrive and develop your career in a healthy way. Like your knowledge base for interview stories, build a list of questions to ask the hiring team based on your research about the company and the role. Over time, figure out where you can compromise and where you can't. Then ask questions to see how many of your must haves the team or the company can provide. Refine. Finally, take notes about your completed interviews, like what questions you're asked. This way, you can hone your answers for those questions for future interviews, and maybe see if there are any interview trends or given roles for given roles or companies. In follow-ups with recruiters or the hiring manager, ask for feedback. These days, it seems like not very many companies are offering feedback, but ask anyway. As you practice interviews, continuously update and refine your stories and your delivery. There are plenty of videos of mock interviews to help give you a sense of what to expect and how you might improve your answers. I see there's a question from
Yeah,
Clinton.
from Clinton. Yes. Oh, let me. Sorry. Oh, I deleted. I feel like he has two questions. I feel like maybe we can go with the first one. I find it's difficult to come up with stories with conflicts and challenges.
Yeah,
And I was thinking about this. I feel like for me, sometimes maybe people want to make like, oh, this big, huge thing happen. Yes. Or um, I don't know if it has to do with like we were mentioning, maybe this never get resolved and um, there is not much to talk about. And I feel like I'm going to give my point of view and then you can add on.
sure.
But I feel like it has to do with a lot of his storytelling and how you telling things. Yes, it's like, oh yes, I didn't work good with that team. Well, if you just say that, it's like what else happened? Yes, and I feel like with all of these questions, when it has to do about behavioral interviews, that is our method is going to be so helpful and powerful because it's going to help you to structure the answers in a way that you can bring people in into your world and into that time in until that point in time. Yes, instead of just saying, yes, I didn't work. I do not work good with people. It's like, but what else? Like, what are you doing? So I feel like we have so many good stories. It's like, do we believe that they're good and that we can add on? I feel like for me is that a lot of that too.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a case where you just can't think of anything. Like maybe you had a really good experience with the teams and the projects that you worked on, and everybody worked well together. That happens sometimes.
That
But
okay.
I think if you can, in that case, like if you really want to answer it, I would go with the, hypothetical route again and just think about like if you were in a person's shoes where this didn't work well, you tried to share work with somebody else and they always dropped the ball, or maybe like, they didn't do what was discussed, or they delivered something that they said they were going to deliver something and then they delivered something else. um, Maybe do some thought experiments and think about like what would happen if I was in this situation. um, how would I react? How would I try to get through to the other person and maybe figure out how to improve the situation? Or if you really just couldn't get through and work with someone, how did you work around it? Like if you still had to deliver something, deliver some kind of milestone or whatever, how did you do it? Um, and it's really just about like talking through your thought processes. Um, they want to know how you would approach things, so that if it happens to you at within their team, they can kind of predict how you're going to react rather than totally not knowing how you would react the first time something bad happens.
Well, Clinton is adding a little bit of like here. So it is a red flag if I share a hypothetical scenario, especially if I have worked in an industry for some time. Another feedback that I received was that they felt I had not been in enough conflicts. It's like,
That's such a weird feedback.
yeah.
Like, what if you were just in a really awesome team? There's nothing you
Yeah.
can do about that. um,
The other thing, oh, sorry, no, you go ahead, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because I don't know if now we are moving into something else, but how far can I go into my stories? Yes, let's say that I talk about my time when I was working in retail, or my time when I was in university. And I mean, this has to do with maybe on my volunteer space. Like,
Mhm.
there's so many spaces that we are part of,
Yeah.
that when can we bring these stories in?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough it's a tough thing to answer because it really depends on like what is the vibe that you're getting from the interviewer. What are they really trying to get at here? Like are they really interested in just hearing horror stories from you, or are they really wanting to understand how you're going to react when you're working for them? Like it's really a matter of kind of interpreting what the interviewer wants to hear and trying to build a story based upon that. And I think that's a really tough situation to be in if they're just like dinging you for, oh, you don't have very many conflicts. And I feel like I was sort of in that same situation where generally my team worked really well together. I mean, we were across different regions. So communications could be tough, based on time zones difference and everything and what the different regions wanted to do. But we always seemed to work it out. Maybe there were situations that I could have talked about, but they didn't end up being really huge situations. So, I mean, at that point, I do think it's fair game to bring in uh, stories from other things. Like if you had from, I mean, don't go back too far, obviously. Like if
Career
you're 10
school.
years within the industry already, don't go back to like college days, but like maybe go back to your previous role and any conflicts that you found there. Or even just like personal, like assuming you're not affecting people's privacy or whatever. Like if you wanted to talk about like a personal conflict that you had, without getting into too much detail about it, just describe the situation and how you dealt with it. Yeah, that's a tough one. I haven't really dealt with that before. I feel like generally they just want to get a sense of like how you react in adverse situations. So
Hmm.
the story that you could
Hmm.
find would be,
I mean, I was thinking, is this company like with a lot of drama? You want to
yeah,
know, they want to know if you
it
are
kind of
prepared
feels
for
like
what is
that.
coming up to you.
It's like,
Yes.
why are you super like trying to get into details of drama in my in my life? Like maybe I don't want
Uh,
to be here for that.
exactly. And I feel like I love that you mentioned it at the beginning, is depending of the questions and how they're asking the questions, you can see if you want to be part of that space or not. And I feel like this is really important to be aware of where you are and how they're
Yeah.
asking the questions. But there is here another from Clinton. Here is a feedback I received from a recent interview. We are looking for someone for more evidence of proactive ownership in driving projects forward. Is there a way to figure out the right story to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I think this one is a little bit more straightforward where it seems like they're looking for someone with more experience within the role that you're going for. So they really want to see how you've led projects. Um, so it's tough if you haven't done a lot of that. If you could maybe refer to projects outside of your work that you've done, like maybe if you have side projects that you run by yourself, or maybe you're working with a friend on building an app or doing something, building a web app or something like that. Like, how do you handle a project? I think, yeah, it's really tough if they're asking this kind of straightforward question and you don't have anything to talk about, because really that's what they're looking for. You
Yeah.
can't really make up stuff in that case. It's definitely something more pointed where they want
Mm-hmm.
to see your experience. So I think that's you can take that as like, going forward, you
Mm-hmm.
should work on projects and you should try to build situations where you do take the lead in a certain project. Like maybe if you're already working and you're in a job, talk to your manager and say that I really want to get experience in driving a project. Is there something that maybe we can work on? Something like that.
Okay, he's giving us a little more. To
Okay.
clarify, I explained in a scenario that I was a project manager lead.
Right.
I had
Okay.
some examples where I led the projects, but I did not know at the time that I had to share the story, or that
Mm.
that's what they were looking. Hmm.
Yeah, I think this could kind of relate to what I talked about earlier of like asking clarifying questions before you answer. So if it's not super clear from how they ask the question, just ask some other questions. Try to get a sense of like what are they really wanting from me, um,
Hmm.
and then like if you happen to think about it later, you could say, oh, can we revisit that question before that you asked about driving projects, because I didn't think about it at the time, but there was this project that I led and I did XYZ, and I did this and that. So I think while you're in the interview, if you happen to think about it and can revisit, then that's helpful. Um, if it comes to you after the interview, you could maybe like you could maybe email back as a follow up to the interviewer and say, I was thinking more about that question you asked, and I realized that this is something that I could have talked about.
Hmm. I mean,
Right.
we
Like,
have to
yeah.
remember that. Oh, are you
Describe a
reading this? Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, describe. Yeah, so it's pretty vague, and sometimes when people ask vague questions, they kind of do it on purpose to, like what I said earlier, is like they want to see how you think. Like, and sometimes it's not necessarily the right approach to just answer right away. Like, I think they want you to think through the situation and ask, what do you really mean by this question? Are you talking about like a question, a project that I led, or a project where I worked with a cross functional group? Is it a project that was assigned to me or something that I built myself? What would you like me to talk about? Something like that.
I love that part because I mean, I feel like it's okay. It's okay to take a pass and it's like, hey, can you give me a little more clues of the stuff that
Yeah,
you want to learn from me? Because it's hard. Yeah, like such an open question. And but I feel like again, something that you mentioned is to have that all those stories writing down, and it will give you a little more opportunity to be able to answer absolutely anything. And again, if you compare it to the job description, and if you know what kind of job are you going for and what they're looking for, how can you always tie the question they're asking you with the role that you're applying for? I think that will be really
yeah.
powerful. Yeah. Or
Maybe.
I feel like, oh, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that now that you can talk to ChatGPT and things like that, like it's one of the things that is a good way of like figuring out what questions to think about, is like to say, I'm interested in XYZ role. What are questions, or you could even probably paste in like the parts of the job description where it lists out attributes and things, and have it hypothesize on what questions is the interviewer going to ask. Like, what does it look like they want to focus on with this role description? Because then you can kind of tailor what stories that you focus on, because you might have a huge repository of stories that cover all sorts of different categories, and you don't necessarily have to cover all of that in the interview. They'll probably focus on certain areas, so as much as possible, try to focus in on those. You could even maybe talk to the recruiter and say, what areas do you think they're going to focus on? Some recruiters might not tell you this, but other recruiters are really good at like kind of prepping you and saying, this is the interview format. These are the types of things they're going to ask you. Like, maybe focus on XYZ.
Yeah, definitely. And he has a little more like, yes, I definitely had to slow down, relax, and clarify. And I feel like,
It's so
again,
hard.
coming down to, yeah, it's really hard. But I feel
It's
like
so
the one that you mentioned about practicing, practicing, practice. And I feel like if you get the chance to practice all your different questions and answer with different type of people, see how do they react, ask them for the feedback right away so you can add into, oh, okay, I should add this into this story.
right.
And coworkers that have known you and have seen you in the space and working can add those little um, extra details that it will
Yeah.
just light up your story a little more. We were
Yeah.
worried that we wouldn't have enough time, so we have like a minute left. Yes, but
I was
I don't know
going
if
to
you have
say,
something.
just one
Yeah, go
one
ahead.
last thing
Yeah.
for Clinton, that and it looks like he's scheduled more mock interviews. That's really good. Like, based on the questions or the experience that you had, like maybe find someone who's going to be a little bit more of a tough interviewer. Like, find someone who will ask you really vague questions, or like really drill down into details that you tell them about your projects, because then it helps you practice that kind of more stressful
Yes,
interview,
yes.
and it helps
Bring
you
some
kind of like
drama into your
anticipate
life.
it more.
Yes, yeah. Love it.
But
Do
yeah,
you have
I don't envy you being in that situation.
no? Yes, it's like we send you all the good luck and good energy, Clint, on your side. Do you have anything else left on your presentation to bring it up
Oh,
again,
I
or?
just basically had one concluding
Yep.
slide. So yeah, it's just a thing to close it out. So yeah, getting through interviews can be nerve wracking, as we can as we've seen. Give yourself time to practice and think about the best stories that can showcase your work and accomplishments, and give yourself a break. Like, give yourself grace when you run into less than ideal interview situations, because it can happen to all of us. Try putting together a support group of people who are job searching at the same time or are in the same domain, because being able to practice with them and talk about your experiences, like, say, the interview that you had, talk about it with them afterwards, it can be really helpful and remind you that you're not alone. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk further about the concepts that I went over or talk about tech in general. I'm happy to discuss, UX consulting, mobile tech, my previous roles, whatever. I'm here to help.
Love it. Thank you so much. And I was going to say, what I love about going to interviews is that you get to practice. I know it's stressful, but then you get to see how you react. You get to see how you
Yeah.
can improve it. And I will say, Clinton, you're just getting closer to the job that you wanted, because you were just putting away the ones that are not and just getting closer. So I know it's tough. Interviewing for a job and looking for a job is not fun, but um, you're getting there and you're practicing and you're trying to get as much knowledge as you can. So I feel like you're doing all the things that is going to help you. uh Thank you so
Awesome.
much, Cheryl, for this. I love
Thank you.
it. It is something, again, that you will not just practice for interviews, but I feel like it's something that you will do for networking, something that you will do when
Yeah.
you presenting your work, when you like,
Mhm.
this is something that you can use in every aspect of your life. So thank you so much. And I feel like, yes, today we are concluding the job readiness, and I'm so pumped. I feel like I talked to like 12 people in the last 7 weeks, so it's been really powerful for me. I will just say, like, I have learned so much from every single person. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you until next time. Bye. Oh, I lost
Bye.
my, okay, here. Bye.
Bye.